Next, we'd like to augment this content, which is just text at the moment, with figures that will help the reader better understand what we're trying to communicate. There are a couple of different ways we can provide figures in this content on the right-hand panel. All of them involve using images that are available via public URLs. We can find figures online that we have permission to share, or we can upload our own content to GitHub and share it that way. We'll start by adding a figure that we've previously identified as a good representation of transmission dynamics versus sampling for phylogenetics. This figure comes from this address here, so we're going to copy this figure and we're going to include it in our narrative in the static content on the right-hand side. To do this, we can go back to our Next-Gen Narratives demo, and we can select the Edit button. We can navigate to the content for the right-hand panel, and we can add our image here under the disease transmission section. We'll do this using an HTML style image tag, which looks like this. It consists of the image tag, followed by a source attribute, some alternative text attribute that allows screen readers to understand what the content is, and then here we're also going to add a width attribute to make sure that our image gets properly sized. Within the source attribute, we can copy and paste the URL for the publicly accessible figure, and then within the alternative text, we can add some useful text, like this is a representation of an infectious disease transmission chain. This content will show in the right-hand panel, but if we preview this now, as before, we'll see that this content is showing up in GitHub as code in a code block. So to actually see if our change had any effect, we're going to save our changes and refresh the narrative. We now see our figure that we copied from the public URL showing up within our content in our Markdown. We can use that same width syntax that controls the size of this figure to make this figure even smaller if this is too big. And we can add additional figures down here in the same way. For example, we might want to upload our own content to GitHub to source in this narrative. To do this, we can go back to GitHub and we can open our Next-Gen Narratives demo repo in a new tab. From this tab, we can navigate to the figures directory, where I've previously uploaded this toy alignment tree figure. I want to include this figure in my narrative, so I'm going to select the figure where I get a preview. To get a URL that I can include in the narrative, I'm going to click the download button. This will display the figure in my browser, and it will also provide me with a URL for the figure that I can include in the narrative. I'm going to copy this URL and go back to my Narratives tab. I'll edit this file again. And now, in addition to this image that I've sourced from a public website, I'm going to add another image tag here with alt text and a width of 100%. And then I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste in the URL from GitHub. You'll notice that this URL comes from this raw githubusercontent.com for my user for this repo and branch. Now I can add representation of an alignment and the corresponding phylogeny. And I can save this by committing my changes. As before, we can't see the images in this preview, but if we return to our narrative slide, we should be able to refresh and see the original image that we added from the publicly accessible URL, and then the new image that we've added via our sourcing from GitHub content. If you'd like, you can add more images by navigating back to the Next-Gen Narratives demo going to the Figures directory, and selecting the Add File button, and uploading new files. We'll leave this as an exercise for you to try out next.